Maximize your yields while spreading out your workload with the earliest maturing winter cereal. Visit kws.com/CA to see how our hybrid rye varieties can work for you. High yields, high quality, high value for your farm. KWS, seeding the future since 1856.
Joining me now is Jim McComb. He's an agronomist and a farmer from near Marmora, and not just a grain farmer. You've got cattle too. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay. It's great to be on the show.
All right. Now, I mentioned the cattle because we've got something in front of us here that near and dear to both our hearts, I think, certainly is land use and conservation, but also in light of perhaps some of the more challenging issues happening here on the east part of the province with wetland designations, it brings up a lot of questions about what makes a wetland. And you've had some recent experience taking a course that really opened your eyes to maybe just how large some of these challenges are. So Jim, what is that course? And then we'll talk about sort of your take on it.
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago, I had the privilege of being selected out of 1,000. There's 1,000 on the list wanting to take the course, the Ontario Wetland Evaluation course. It's administered out of Nipissing University in North Bay. So it's up there in the woods, and there's 40 students, and the professor said it was a rarity to have agriculture-based people take the course.
Okay, which is fascinating to me because if we think about what I would consider, conservation areas, sure, some of us might think, a lake and the woods, etc. But for so many of us, we farm right up against or in the middle of what others may consider conservation areas. And we have streams, we have ponds, we have so many areas on our farms that potentially are ecologically sensitive. What was your did you talk about the fact that agriculture wasn't well represented maybe in this course?
Yeah, like I talked to the professors that, and they have such a broad base to cover. Ontario has a huge amount of wetland and a valuable resource in both southern, but a lot in northern Ontario. That's a good carbon sink, a good resource for timber, a good resource for activities like hunting and fishing.
Mm-hmm.
And so agriculture doesn't get the spotlight here because I think partially because of the course location in North Bay. There's some agricultural land up there, but it's limited, and there's so much to focus on. It's only a 5-day course, so there's so much to focus on to get our heads around in deciding whether a wetland is a marsh or a swamp or a fen versus looking at agricultural land that's really not in that area.
So and therein, I think it's the crux of part of the reason we're having this conversation is exactly that. So it's a 5-day course. We're hopeful you passed, Jim. We'll find out if you did. It is very intense.
We will.
As you mentioned, yeah, we hope you do. But as an agronomist and as a farmer, why did you want to take this course? How does this fit into what you're doing in your business and with your livelihood? And why is this important to you? Why did you want to do this?
Well, Lindsay, in the 20 years I've ran the Farmers Edge agri coaching, I've had multiple interactions with the conservation authorities and with farmers. And sometimes I go out to the site and I'm just sometimes a help with negotiations or throw some ideas in there on what we can do with wetlands that are bordering farmland. And I decided as things were evolving and some cases are being taken to tribunal or court, that I need to have qualifications to be able to be in that position. And farmers really need the help.
So yes, so this is one of the things now personally. So I'm a livestock operator as well. We have land, we have a creek on site, we have, and conservation is important to our farm personally, and I think a lot of farms would say that as well. However, it does become a very contentious topic when conservation comes in, and like we've just seen here on the east side of the province, and wants to designate a whole bunch of land that perhaps you're currently farming as, a wetland. And I think a lot of farmers are looking at it going, this is not necessarily maybe something that's in their wheelhouses to be able to argue effectively because, and this is the one thing I want to talk to you about, is many times, people say, well, there's no water there. So why are we designating this a wetland? So walk me through sort of what makes this designation and why maybe it's so contentious.
So wetland is determined by having the first thing we look at is having 50% wetland type vegetation. So there's a list of trees and ground vegetation and some pretty obvious ones. And then there's some that will grow on both upper land that's dry and wetland. But we look for that 50% cover of the ground with wetland plants. The other thing we look at is we go out there with what I call Dutch soil auger and pull a sample, and you'll have clay soil, which is kind of a gray blue sticky soil, and it will quite often have iron inclusions, little rust spots in the soil, which is a good indicator of a wetland. But if you pull a sample and it doesn't have those indicators, you start to lean towards maybe it's not a wetland, or maybe it's just seasonal that the water's on there. And then there's aeration in the soil later on in the season. We've got some soils right now in Ontario that are underwater, even with crops growing on them. So
that's right.
They are not wetlands. Yeah.
So, and that I think is part of the issue and especially when, with farmers who know their land well and who perhaps have farmed there for generations, to have someone come in and, say, well, this actually is wetland, when perhaps, as you mentioned, there are other areas that are much wetter during the season than that particular piece of land. And it does create a lot of friction, I think. And let's back up a step. Not everybody loves being told what to do on their own land.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the conservation authorities, the people in the course were engineers and biologists. And we were in groups of 4. I had a great group that, there was one that could, Tracy could identify a bird just by the song. And so you're surrounded by experts. And I think there's a point of, they have a lot of expertise, and we should take that into account. But it's good for the farmer to learn what might impact their land. When these borders have been drawn up, quite often they're done with GIS programming, right. and it's very loosely fitted, I'd say, in determining wetland. Sometimes it's just determining it by the presence of water in the spring. So right. I think some of the software can capture more land than what really, when you get boots on the ground, it is wetland. So right. So the next steps might be having boots on the ground to determine.
So, and I think you've identified, and this is, and I'm continuing to follow what's happening here in Eastern Ontario with the conservation districts here, that, that was what was presented to everyone, was the GIS map that showed the proposed wetland areas, or what would be redrawn essentially as wetland areas. And many people were incredibly, upset by that because, it was clear that it hadn't necessarily been ground truthed, if we want to use that word. And so it does create, there is a consultation process, but you have to book that appointment. You have to have someone come out. And I mean, to me, in and of itself, that sort of creates conflict. So let's say, and you're taking this course as a proactive measure to be sort of a mediator, or potentially be one of those experts that goes to these meetings. How can a farmer best prepare for one of these consultations? What would you suggest that they do should they have these questions and put in for one of these meetings?
Yeah, well, I think firstly is understand that the conservation authority is is trying to do their job with the tools they have. They have thousands of acres to evaluate. So go out there with a positive attitude, I think. Um, don't be fearful. Like the land that is already cultivated is not wetland. They can't pull it into being wetland. It's farmland. So and get informed. There's the Ontario Wetland book is online if you want to do some research through it, and don't be afraid to reach out to someone that's more comfortable with or has dealt with the Conservation Authority before to discuss with them. But yeah, I'd maybe consult with someone before I'd have the Conservation Authority in, just to have a better preparation and details on your own land. And look at the maps, the online maps.
Yeah.
They're very helpful.
Yeah. Now, it does also bring up, the fact that there are many farmers doing significant projects on their own land to protect certain sensitive areas, riparian areas, wetlands, etc. And my mind sort of goes to, we do have funding programs that support some of that work. We have species at risk program, and we have. So to me, that should help to tip the balance of how confrontational conservation in Ontario might be with farmers, etc. Have we not done a good enough job potentially at supporting farmers protecting some of these areas proactively?
Farmers have done a great job protecting wetlands and sensitive areas. And in fact, agriculture has an important role to play. We're supplying some of that water with tile outlets, and those tile outlets, putting them in properly, can influence the water, the quality of the water that we have. Managing the nutrients can influence the quality of the water in the wetland. And just recently, there's a program in Niagara where we're using goats to pasture off an invasive species called Phragmites, and that makes me think, oh, well, maybe agriculture has a larger role to play in wetland conservation and improvement in wetlands. So yeah, farmers keep doing what you're doing. Look for those programs. There's programs right within the conservation authorities to fence off, quite often to fence off livestock, or have a remote watering system for livestock. And keep up the good work, but be conscious that there are limits at what we can do. I've talked to farmers that have pulled damp land into a field, and then they've regretted it because it's not very good soil to work with, and then it's work to get that back to being a wetland too. So.
All right, Jim, thank you so much. Also, I didn't know how to say Phragmites. I've always just said Phragmites. So thank you for fixing that one for me. I learned a new word. So there you go. So I appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Yep. Thanks very much, Lindsay. It was a pleasure. And have a safe summer as we harvest some tough hay and mediocre quality hay.
There's a lot of that to go around, let me tell you. All right. Thanks so much, Jim.